How did great writers suffer from gambling addiction? One pawned his wife's jewelry for a single spin of the roulette wheel. Another spent hours searching for patterns and turned gambling into an exhausting full-time job. A third dreamed of reaching a casino in the afterlife, one with unlimited credit. All three were gamblers. All three lost their fortunes and fell into enormous debt. And all three transformed their addiction into literature that we still read today. What was gambling for them? A disease? A hope for a miracle? Or a test of character? How did they explore these ideas in their books? This is the story of why great writers kept returning to gambling again and again, even when they knew they could lose everything. Let's begin. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky travels to Europe for the first time and sits down at a roulette table for the first time in his life. On June 24th, he approaches the table at a casino in Wiesbaden. From that moment begins a 9-year obsession that nearly destroys him. He gambles in Baden-Baden, Wiesbaden, Hamburg, again and again. At one point, he wins 10,000 francs and even develops his own gambling system. But it brings him no victories. Dostoevsky loses everything and writes desperate letters to his fiancée Anna from the gambling halls. "Forgive me for destroying your life." Anna pawns her wedding ring, earrings, and brooch, anything to give her future husband more money. This is not simply a weakness. It is the classic trap of a compulsive gambler. He understands that he is losing and still cannot walk away from the table. And it was inside this trap that a great work of literature was born. In 1866, under the threat of losing the rights to all his future books, Dostoevsky dictated the novel The Gambler in just 26 days, and the stenographer was none other than Anna herself. In the novel, he formulates his concept of gambling. The protagonist, Alexei, says, "However ridiculous it may seem that I should place so much hope in roulette, it seems to me even more ridiculous to accept the conventional opinion, universally recognized, that it is foolish and absurd to expect anything from gambling." These words contain the essence of Dostoevsky's idea. For him, gambling was not about calculation. It was a belief in a miracle, in the idea that fate might choose you at this very moment. He portrayed gambling as the tragedy of human hope. At the same time, gambling was not simply a vice. In the novel, Dostoevsky shows how gambling enters the human psyche, consumes emotions, relationships, and eventually the very personality itself. By the end of the novel, Alexei is no longer just a gambler who has run out of money. He is a man who has lost himself. Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was a gambler too, and horse racing was the game that drew him in more than any other. In his memoir, A Movable Feast, Hemingway recalls Paris in the 1920s. Back then, he and his first wife, Hadley, were absorbed by the world of horse racing. Betting on horses had become part of everyday life, and there were times when a winning ticket meant the difference between a good dinner and going hungry. As Hemingway himself wrote, a successful bet sent them to a fine restaurant. A losing one meant tightening their belts and spending as little as possible. As time went on, racing began to occupy more and more of his life. He spent hours studying races, looking for patterns, and hunting for favorable odds. Eventually, he admitted that it had started to feel like a job of its own. Together with friends, he contributed to shared betting pools and placed larger and larger wagers. On one occasion, after receiving insider information about a favorite, Hemingway went from friend to friend and even approached people he owed money to, raising a substantial sum before putting all of it on a single horse. But horse racing was only part of the story. Hemingway's appetite for gambling extended well beyond the racetrack. While living in Cuba, he bred fighting cocks and wagered on cockfights. In Key West, he regularly played poker with sailors and smugglers. It was a game he had loved since childhood, having first learned it from his father. Hemingway's concept of gambling was highly unusual, and it found its way into many of his works. He approached gambling almost philosophically. In the short story The Gambler, The Nun, and The Radio, he expresses what may be his central idea about gambling. For some people, it is one of the ways of coping with suffering. Some endure through faith, others through humor, and others through the thrill of the game. For Hemingway, risk was an essential part of his famous Code Hero. Risk revealed who a person really was. It tested character, resilience, and self-control. And even in defeat, A person was expected to maintain dignity and grace. Mario Puzo. Mario Puzo did not write The Godfather for literary fame. He needed money, and he needed it urgently. By the late 1960s, the writer found himself in a difficult financial situation. A wife, 5 children, debts, and a constant shortage of money. I was 45 years old and tired of being an artist. Besides, I owed $20,000 to relatives, finance companies, banks, and assorted bookmakers in Shylocks. One of the main reasons behind this situation was, of course, gambling. It had been part of his life since childhood. Cards, roulette, and sports betting. In his book Inside Las Vegas, Puzo admitted that when he gambled, he dreamed of winning everything. Is that so different from those religious fanatics who dare to think that after death, they will go to their particular heaven? As an atheist, Puzo often compared gambling to religion. What non-gamblers do not know is the feeling of virtue when the dice rolls as one command, and that omniscient goodness when the card you need rises to the top of the deck. It is as close as I have ever come to a religious feeling. The novel The Godfather made Puzo rich and famous, but the theme of gambling continued to fascinate him. In his novel Fools Die, the main character is writer John Merlin, who descends into the world of Las Vegas, huge winnings and devastating losses. Through this story, Puzo explores a question. Why does a gambler return to the table even after learning the true price of defeat? For Puzo, gambling was an illusion of control over chaos, a brief moment when a player feels like the master of his own fate. Should I go to heaven, give me rather a vaulting red-walled casino with bright lights. Let there be a pit boss in the sky who will give me unlimited credit. And if there is a merciful God in our universe, he will decree that the player have for all eternity an edge against the house. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed it.